It's around 10 p.m. I'm in my apartment in Egypt, walking down the hallway away from the front door when I hear the door opening behind me. I turn around and it's my parents. I haven't seen them all day, so I run into their arms and I immediately pull back. They smelled of tear gas. I tried to cough it out and I noticed they're covered in blood splotches. They reassured me it wasn't their blood. It's 2 days later. I've been walking for nearly 8 hours. There is a black haze covering everything. Helicopters flew overhead. A car speeds by. I see a body covered in white. A motorcycle goes by. There are 2 men in it. One of them had a hole in his head. August 14th, 2013. I get a Facebook message from a friend. I'm watching Al Jazeera, and I don't think Egypt is safe right now. She doesn't know that earlier that day, my parents ran out of the house with only the reassurance that I wouldn't leave my brothers behind and headed toward Rabaa. All day long, I could do nothing but watch the news, wait for phone calls, and pray. My parents were covered in blood because they spent the day in Rabia's field hospital. All day, they were binding bullet wounds, dodging bullets, and stitching body parts. My mom told me how one man stood patiently as my dad sewed his ears, blood still gushing, how she tried to keep someone alive and suddenly they'd go still. She showed me her shoes, the dark bottoms stained red. She told me how bodies were lined up by the hundreds in rooms and stairwells. My dad told me how at the end of the day, they were forced to leave the hospital, leave everyone behind. My parents tried to help 3 men out that couldn't walk on their own, but they were shoved away. My mom found out the next day that Rabaa Hospital and everyone inside was burned. For the next couple months, all they ever dreamed of were those 3 faces, and that they couldn't save them. Rabaa was a square, a giant intersection, where a few weeks before a sit-in had begun. It kept getting larger, taking over several blocks in every direction. At the very least, it was an inconvenience to Cairo. At the most, it was the center of revolutionary activity. I got to be a part of it for a week and a half before it burned. I remember sitting on my grandmother's balcony, keeping a lookout for my parents in case they ever came back. I remember the smoke and the explosion from several blocks away. Then came September. I was home. I was finally a junior. Everyone was stressing over colleges and grades and SAT scores, and so was I. But on top of that, I was living with depression and guilt and hopelessness. I knew what happened in Egypt and what was still happening, and I carried it everywhere with me. All I could ever do was talk about Egypt, and few of my friends wanted to listen to it. Political prisoners and death counts don't make for pleasant conversation. I felt guilty because I was alive and so many people weren't. I needed to do something, but I never knew what. I think the scariest part about being a teenager is being expected to plan out our entire futures as 17-year-olds. When making my college decision, I had to choose between a 4-year university and a 7-year medical program. I would talk to adults, and they were astounded by my uncertainty. Of course, the 7-year program. Your entire future is planned out. My mom would tell me, of course you wanted to be a doctor. I was terrified of looking back in 7 years and regretting this decision. I ended up choosing the program, but I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. The only thing I knew was that I wanted to be an activist, and I wasn't going to give it up. My rants about the imperialistic nature of American foreign policy are not indicators of a phase, but the limits of my capacity as a teenager. For now, I'll rant, but I didn't want to rant forever. My parents are both activists and have been long before I was born. But they're always torn between their lives and their activisms. My dad splits his days between working with his patients and lobbying congressmen about Egypt. My parents were activists, but their activism was reduced to a second job. I didn't want that for myself, but I refused to go into politics. My government teacher could tell you how I incur the wrath of half my class with a few misplaced words. Then, a couple months ago, a representative from Doctors Without Borders came to visit TJ. I thought I didn't believe in love at first sight, with the organization, not the representative. But now, when I remember Egypt, and the 7 years I'm about to spend crying over biology textbooks, I get excited. I spent hours scouring the Doctors Without Borders website. I can be an activist and a doctor, and they can be the same thing. Instead of writing a frantic Facebook post about Syrian chemical bombs, I can frantically try and save Syrian children. The hopelessness of watching people getting hurt and not being able to do anything about it was a feeling I knew too well, and I would never have to feel it again. I know it's cliche to say I want to help save the world, but I'm going to do it anyways. Thank you.